Greetings, dear friends. Today, I invite you on an enthralling journey through Norse mythology, a world of gods, heroes, and mysterious creatures. Norse mythology is more than just a collection of ancient tales. It's an entire universe filled with enigmas, reflecting the harshness of the northern wilderness and recounting an epic clash of forces. It captivates with its depth, originality, and abundance of stories that retain their allure even today. Mythology is virtually shrouded in a fog of secrets. A significant portion of what we know has come down to us through oral tradition, which was only recorded in writing centuries later in sources such as the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. However, despite this, many aspects remain unresolved. For instance, what preceded the creation of the world? What was life like before Ragnarök, the great battle of the gods? These gaps leave vast room for imagination, inspiring modern creators. The Norse people believed that their world was a phenomenon far grander than just the earth beneath their feet. The various realms are connected by Yggdrasil, the tree of life, whose roots and branches permeate all existence. And each of these worlds, whether Asgard, Midgard, or Jotunheim, holds its own secrets. Even the deities themselves, such as Odin, Loki, Thor, and Freya, are shrouded in mystery. Odin, the supreme god, is willing to make any sacrifice for knowledge, including his own eye. Isn't that intriguing? Why was knowledge of such paramount importance to him? Norse mythology originated in an environment where survival was not merely a daily task, but a genuine struggle. Harsh climates, freezing winters, inhospitable landscapes. All of this left its mark on the worldview of the ancient Norse people. Their myths are full of the same trials and battles, not just against adversaries, but also against nature itself. Imagine the northern wind whipping your face, snow covering the ground, and the endless polar night when it seems the world has frozen. It is in such circumstances that tales are born of heroes fighting giants, monsters, and even their own destiny. This harshness lends the myths incredible realism and makes them relatable to people, as life was depicted as it was, full of hardship, but also full of achievement. The scale of Norse myths is astonishing. There's no room for insignificant details. Every event carries weight for the entire universe. The battle between giants and gods isn't just a conflict between two factions. It's a confrontation that determines the fate of the world. Ragnarök isn't just an end, it's the final battle, followed by a new beginning. The epic nature of the myths is reflected in the heroes performing unimaginable deeds. Thor, smiting giants with his hammer Mjolnir. Loki, the trickster, capable of changing the course of events with a single ruse. Or Heimdall, standing guard on the Bifrost Bridge, ready to be the first to meet the enemy in the final hour. Each narrative unfolds against the backdrop of grandiose events. A dragon guarding immense riches, the giant wolf Fenrir, posing a threat to the gods themselves, or the world tree Yggdrasil, experiencing both the birth and destruction of the universe. These stories contain everything, from heroism to tragedy, from greatness to catastrophe, and that makes them both magnificent and deeply human. It should not be forgotten that Norse mythology reflects the Viking Age, their view of the world and life. For Vikings, who sailed the seas, fought for honor, and sought a path to Valhalla, mythology was more than just a collection of tales. It was their religion, philosophy, and way of understanding and explaining everything around them. These myths taught resilience, acceptance of the challenges of fate, and a lack of fear of death. For death is not the end, but merely a transition to another world. Valhalla awaited those who fell heroically in battle, while for others there remained Folkvanger, where the goddess Freya ruled. Even after death, existence continued, full of adventures and battles. Today, Norse mythology continues to be a source of inspiration. It gives us images of true heroes, teaches us to cope with difficulties, and reminds us that behind every darkness lies light. This legacy connects us to the past, demonstrating that, despite all the changes, human aspirations and dreams remain unchanged. Most of our knowledge of Norse mythology has come to us through written sources. Primarily, these are, as already mentioned, the poetic Edda and the prose Edda. These two texts are recognized as fundamental to understanding ancient Scandinavian myths and legends. The poetic Edda, also known as the Elder Edda, is a collection of ancient songs recorded in the 13th century but rooted in much earlier oral traditions. These poems tell of the fates of gods and heroes, as well as the coming of Ragnarök, an apocalyptic event heralding the end of the first world and the birth of a new one. It is saturated with mysteries and metaphors that still generate debate among researchers. The prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson, a prominent Icelandic historian and writer, is a kind of textbook on mythology. Snorri created it not only to preserve ancient knowledge, but also to help poets of his time use mythological imagery in their work. In this book, the myths are presented in prose, often accompanied by explanations and interpretations by the author himself. However, before the appearance of these written texts, myths were passed down orally. Oral tradition played a central role in Scandinavian culture. Vikings and their predecessors did not use writing to record their legends. There were poets-skalds who memorized and passed down stories from generation to generation. These masters of words not only entertained listeners, but also carried out an important educational mission, embedding in their works key values such as honor, courage, loyalty, and the pursuit of glory. Oral tradition gave myths flexibility, allowing new details to be added or adapting plots to the trends of the time. Thanks to it, many myths were preserved and reached us even after the Christianization of Scandinavia, when pagan beliefs began to be displaced by the new religion. Thus, the poetic Edda, the prose Edda, and oral tradition together form a remarkable mosaic of knowledge about ancient myths. These sources give us the opportunity to immerse ourselves in a mysterious world where gods, giants, and mortals are intertwined in an epic narrative full of wisdom and drama. Now let's turn to one of the most striking and significant symbols of Norse mythology, Yggdrasil. Imagine a tree of such gigantic size that its roots reach into the depths of the world of the dead and its crown reaches the heavens themselves. Yggdrasil is not just a tree. It is the axis of the universe, which connects all 9 worlds, creating invisible threads that connect gods, people, and monsters. The upper branches of the tree extend to Asgard, the world of the Aesir, majestic gods residing in halls shimmering with gold. There, among the clouds, is Valhalla, a huge hall where fallen warriors indulge in feasting while awaiting the final battle. Ragnarök. Asgard is the embodiment of strength, wisdom, and greatness. Below is Vanaheim, the abode of the Vanir, gods associated with fertility, magic, and natural cycles. It's a green and thriving place where nature and magic merge into one, and harmony with the earth is the foundation of all being. Next comes Midgard, the world of humans. Imagine land surrounded by a boundless ocean, in which the giant serpent Jörmungandr eternally swims, guarding the borders of this world. Midgard is the epicenter of events, where the fates of gods and mortals intersect. Here, life is filled with struggle, but it is in this struggle that the strength of spirit is forged. Far to the east lies Jotunheim, the land of giants. It's a harsh land with high mountains, icy plains, and untamed nature. Giants are powerful beings, symbolizing chaos and destruction, but their presence is necessary to maintain balance. Then comes Alfheim. This is a place where magic is intertwined with light. This world is inhabited by light elves, Alfar, beings associated with art, beauty, and wisdom. Their world is filled with mysterious energy, and their assistance often proves crucial in the struggle of gods and mortals. In contrast, there are Svartalfheim and Nidavellir, the underground worlds of dark elves and dwarves. Dvergar. Here, in the depths of the earth, skilled craftsmen create magical artifacts such as Thor's hammer Mjolnir or Odin's spear Gungnir. Their work remains invisible, but it is they who endow the gods with power. Even lower extends Niflheim, the world of ice, mists, and eternal cold, personifying primordial chaos. Its icy breath serves as a reminder of the fragility and value of life. Opposite it is Muspelheim, the realm of fire. Here an unquenchable flame reigns, and the fire giant Surtur rules. Finally, at the very roots of Yggdrasil is Helheim, the world of the dead. Here the goddess Hel reigns, half beautiful, half disfigured. Her kingdom is quiet and gloomy, but not evil. It's a place where souls find peace, becoming part of the great cycle of life and death. All these worlds are invisibly connected to each other through the roots and branches of Yggdrasil. They exert mutual influence, creating constant movement and dynamics. This eternal intertwining of order and chaos, light and darkness, makes Norse mythology truly alive and deep. Yggdrasil remains its heart, a symbol of harmony and resilience, even in the face of the coming end of the world, Ragnarök. Let's go back to the origins and learn how the world and all things were born. Imagine a primordial void, devoid of light and darkness, in which there is not the slightest movement. This is Ginnungagap, a bottomless abyss, where there is yet no sky, no earth, no stars. Only from afar can one sense the heat of Muspelheim and the cold wind of Niflheim. Where fire meets ice, the first drops of matter are born, from which life will soon arise. In this boundless void, the first to appear is the giant Ymir. He embodies unbridled chaos, and from his body is born an entire tribe of frost giants. However, even such a powerful creation needs food. It was then that the cow Audhumla appeared in Ginnungagap. Milk flowed endlessly from her udders, which Ymir fed on. And the cow herself survived by licking salty ice, and inside these ice flows, the figure of a god named Buri gradually appears. Buri turns out to be like a human, but endowed with divine power. He does not have the chaotic nature of Ymir. His essence is much closer to the future gods, wise and purposeful. It is Buri who becomes the progenitor of a new kind. From him comes a son, Bor. And Bor has 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve. They grow up in the midst of endless emptiness, but feel a call to action. The world has been in a state of chaos for too long, and sooner or later, they will have to enter into conflict with the giants who are multiplying from Ymir's body. The brothers realize that as long as the element of giants is at the head of the world, there will be no true order. Soon, a conflict erupts between the gods and the ice giants. The very first giant, Ymir, becomes the main target of the three brothers. The death of this giant means not only the overthrow of a chaotic force, but also the transition to an ordered world order. By killing Ymir, the brothers commit an act of creation. Oceans and rivers are born from the giant's bloody streams. The earth is formed from his flesh, and the skeleton is transformed into mountains girdling the new reality. Ymir's long hair covers the still young earth with forests and grasses, and his skull, raised to the very top, becomes a majestic celestial vault, and so that something resembling the power of fire shone above this vault, the gods take sparks from Muspelheim and scatter them across the sky. That's how the stars appear. Thus, from the boundless abyss of Ginnungagap is born an ordered cosmos. But in its depths, the memory is forever preserved that the world arose not from harmony, but from the clash of two hostile elements, from the cruel sacrifice of the original being. The primordial whisper of Ginnungagap lives under their heavenly vault. It is a reminder that even in the very heart of order pulsates the same chaos without which there would be no beginning. After the creation of the world, the gods not only brought chaos into order, but also became its guardians. However, the universe is not a serene place at all. The 9 worlds, interconnected by the branches of the great Yggdrasil, are full of dangers, intrigues, and uncharted mysteries. Above all these worlds rises Asgard, the abode of the gods, in the center of which lives their leader and chief strategist, Odin. Odin is a god who not only rules, but studies and reflects. His strength lies not in brute force like Thor's, or in cunning like Loki's. His main strength is wisdom. The greatest army will not defeat the enemy without knowing its vulnerabilities. That is why the thirst for knowledge and understanding of the hidden mechanisms of the universe becomes Odin's main goal. But everything in the world has a price. Legend has it that one day Odin heard about the Well of Mimir, a source filled with the most ancient wisdom. This well was at the roots of Yggdrasil, and its waters held knowledge of the past, present, and future. The guardian of the well was the giant Mimir, known for his incredible insight. When Odin came to Mimir and asked to drink from the source, he faced a condition that would have seemed unbearable to anyone else. Mimir demanded his eye in exchange for a sip of wisdom. Odin, without hesitation, tore out his eye and threw it into the waters of the well. From that moment on, he became one-eyed, but gained what he was looking for: boundless knowledge. Mimir also became an important figure in his quest. Even after the death of the giant, his head, preserved by magic, continued to advise Odin. The god always carried it, with him to get wise advice at any moment. But this sacrifice turned out to be only the first step. Along with wisdom, prophecies about the future came to Odin, and he learned a terrible truth. One day, the world will perish, and even the gods themselves will not be able to prevent it. It was from that moment that he began to develop his plans to save the remnants of the world, trying to prevent the inevitable. The thirst for knowledge pushed Odin to the most dangerous places. One day he went to Helheim, the gloomy world of the dead, to summon the spirit of the deceased Volva, CRS. He was looking for answers to questions about the future, about what the end of time would be like and whether it could be avoided. The path to Helheim was not easy. This world was ruled by Hel, Loki's daughter, and was surrounded by a wall of snakes and rotting flesh. To penetrate there, Odin took the form of an old man and overcame dangerous lands inhabited by spirits of the dead. Meeting the vulva, he was able to hear the prophecy about Ragnarök. The vulva told him how the world would burn in fire, how the wolf Fenrir would tear his bonds, how the serpent Jörmungandr would rise from the depths of the ocean, and how the Aesir themselves would fall in this last battle. Odin not only sought to comprehend mysteries, but also brought to the world knowledge that had not existed before. We are talking about runes, symbols through which reality can be controlled. But gaining the runes required an incredible sacrifice. To unlock the secret of the runes, Odin spent 9 days and nights hanging on the world tree Yggdrasil, having previously pierced himself with his own spear. Without food or water, he stared into the abyss of the cosmos, seeking answers. Legend has it that in that moment, he seemingly died and was reborn, gaining an understanding of the runes. Each rune carried a special power. They were not just symbols, but tools to influence fate. With runes, one could summon protection, predict the future, or even change it. These symbols became an important part of magic for both gods and humans. Stories about Odin demonstrate that knowledge is the greatest power, but its price is always high. He gave up an eye, shed his own blood, and even risked his life to learn more about the world. After so many sacrifices and trials Odin endured for the sake of wisdom and protecting the world, it's worth looking at other key characters in the Norse pantheon, those who complement this story not only with strength, but also with cunning and stark contradictions. Perhaps one of the most fascinating themes in this mythology is the relationship between Thor and Loki. Thor is the embodiment of strength, resolve, and fearlessness. The son of Odin and the earth goddess Jörd, he inherited his father's power, but possesses neither his cunning nor his subtlety. Thor is as direct as a lightning strike. He is always ready to rush into battle and rarely thinks about the consequences. His main weapon is the legendary hammer Mjolnir, forged by the dwarf smiths, the brothers Brokkr and Sindri. This hammer could crush mountains, strike down giants, and return to Thor's hand no matter how far it was thrown. But to wield such power, Thor wore iron gloves, Járngreipar, and a magical belt, Mega-tsunami, which doubled his strength. These attributes made him not just strong, but virtually invincible. Thor's enemies were primarily giants, or Jötnar. Interestingly, Thor's mother was from the Jotun race. Giants held dominion over many lands beyond Asgard, and they repeatedly tried to seize the world of the gods. But every time the threat became too close, Thor would raise Mjolnir and embark on a campaign. One of Thor's most famous feats was his battle with the giant Hrungnir, who showed up right in Asgard and began boasting that he would destroy the gods and take the goddess Freya. To defend the honor of Asgard, Thor challenged Hrungnir to a duel. The battle took place on the border of the worlds. Hrungnir armed himself with a giant stone shield and a whetstone, hoping they would withstand Mjolnir's blows. But Thor's hammer thundered through the shield and crushed the giant's head. The giant himself was defeated, but a fragment of the whetstone pierced Thor's head, almost killing him. Yet even wounded, he remained unbreakable. Another well-known story is the journey of Thor and Loki to the realm of the giants, Utgard. It all began when Thor, the thunderer and protector of Asgard, set out to distant lands beyond the familiar world. His goal was simple: to prove that no giant, however cunning or strong, could rival him. Thor, as usual, took Loki, his companion in numerous adventures, and Thialfi, a young but exceptionally fast youth who later became his loyal servant. When they finally reached Utgard, Thor was immediately struck by awe. The majestic palace rising before him was so enormous that Thor and his companions were able to simply walk straight through the gates. Inside, they were greeted by Utgard Loki, the ruler of this place, whose smile decreased. For him, accustomed to victories, this was unthinkable. Then Utgard Loki offered another challenge: to lift a cat. What could be easier? Thor approached, grabbed it by the paws, and tried to lift it, but the cat wouldn't budge. Thor strained his mighty muscles, his face turning red with effort, and he only managed to lift one paw off the ground. Angry and humiliated, Thor demanded another challenge. This time he was offered to wrestle an old woman named Ellie. Thor rushed into battle, ready to prove his strength, but the old woman turned out to be surprisingly strong. Thor tried his best to move her, but she stood as if rooted to the ground. At some point, he even found himself on one knee before her. No one could believe what was happening. This wasn't the Thor they all knew. The god of thunder was facing something that couldn't be defeated by sheer strength. The next day, as they prepared to leave Utgard, Utgard Loki revealed the truth. Each of these challenges was not what it seemed. The horn was connected to the ocean. The cat was the world's serpent Jörmungandr, and the old woman, Ellie, was old age itself, which no one can overcome. Thor stood, clutching his hammer, ready to destroy everything around him, but Utgard Loki and his palace disappeared, leaving him on an empty plain. This journey was a reminder to Thor that even strength has its limits, but he didn't take it as a defeat. For Thor, it was a challenge he would one day answer. But perhaps the most popular myth about Thor is the story of the theft of Mjolnir. One day, Thor woke up and found that his hammer, Mjolnir, was gone. It wasn't just a weapon. Without it, Asgard became vulnerable to giant attacks. In a panic, Thor turned to Loki, known for his sharp mind. Loki discovered that the giant Thrym had stolen the hammer and hidden it deep in his realm. Thrym set a bold condition. He would return the hammer only in exchange for the hand of the goddess Freya. Of course, Freya refused, but Loki came up with a cunning plan. Thor was dressed in a wedding dress and disguised as a bride. Loki pretended to be her handmaid. Although Thor was furious at this humiliation, he agreed, knowing there was no other way. When the bride arrived at Thrym's, he threw a feast. Thor, pretending to be Freya, ate for 3, which greatly surprised the giants. Loki justified this by saying she was so nervous before the wedding that she hadn't eaten for days. When Thrym decided to hand over Mjolnir as a sign of marriage, Thor grabbed the hammer, tore off his veil, and furiously destroyed the giant and his entire entourage. This incident showed how Loki's cunning and Thor's strength together could solve any problem. Let's get to know Loki, probably the most ambiguous character in all of mythology. He is the embodiment of contradictions, a Jotun by origin, but living among the gods of Asgard. He is a trickster who sometimes saves the world and sometimes brings it to the brink of destruction. He is duplicitous and charming. For some, he is a destroyer. For others, he is a catalyst for change. And yet one thing is certain: without Loki, the customs of his people. It was also unusual that Loki became an ally of the gods of Asgard. He was not only their companion, but also the blood brother of Odin himself. What prompted Odin to accept Loki into Asgard? Perhaps his cunning, resourcefulness, and ability to solve complex problems, qualities that other Aesir sometimes lacked. But it was these traits, multiplied by a thirst for freedom and a penchant for deception, that made Loki a figure who evokes both admiration and distrust. Loki was not just a god, he was a catalyst for events. Wherever he appeared, change always began. His abilities to transform himself were astonishing. He could take the form of a bird, a fish, a woman, or even a horse. Yes, once Loki, to distract the horse Svadilfari, turned into a mare and became the mother of the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, which he later gave to Odin. This is the nature of Loki. He could bring immense benefit, but often this happened after he himself had created problems. One of the most famous stories that reveals this duality of Loki is the abduction of Idun's apples. Idun is the goddess of youth, the keeper of the magic apples that granted the gods of Asgard eternal youth. Every time, when the Aesir gathered for a feast, Idun would take out her apples, and with each bite, the gods would become strong and young again. But one day, Asgard lost this gift, and as always, Loki was to blame. One day, Loki went on a journey with Odin and Honir. During their travels, they found themselves in barren lands where there was no food at all. They saw a mighty ox, and the gods decided to cook it. But no matter how hard they tried, the meat wouldn't cook. The reason became clear when the giant Thjazi appeared above them in the guise of an eagle. He used magic to stop the fire and demanded that they give him some of the meat. Loki, as always, wanted to cheat and defiantly challenged the giant, but Thjazi wasn't someone you could play games with. He grabbed Loki in his claws and lifted him high into the sky. In exchange for his freedom, the giant demanded that Loki help him kidnap Idun and her magic apples. Returning to Asgard, Loki devised a cunning plan. He convinced Idun to leave Asgard, saying that he had found apples in the forest even more amazing than her own, and offered to compare them. As soon as Idun stepped outside Asgard, Thjazi, in the form of an eagle, grabbed her and carried her off to his realm. Without the apples, the gods began to age rapidly. Their skin became wrinkled, their strength waned, and Asgard was on the verge of collapse. When the Aesir realized what had happened, they demanded that Loki fix everything, because only he could find a way to rescue Idun from the giant's clutches. Loki, as always, wriggled out of it. He borrowed the goddess Freya's magic cloak of falcon feathers, which allowed him to fly. Turning into a falcon, he sneaked into Thjazi's realm. The giant was not expecting any trickery at all. Loki found Idun, turned her into a nut, and grabbed her in his claws. He flew out of the giant's palace, and Thjazi, noticing the loss, rushed in pursuit. The falcon flew towards Asgard as fast as he could. The gods, noticing Loki and the giant approaching, quickly lit a huge fire by the walls of Asgard. When Thjazi flew too close, he fell into the flames, burned his wings, and crashed to the ground. There, the Aesir finished him off. Idun returned to Asgard, and the gods regained their youth. Loki, though he was the cause of all the trouble, once again managed to prove his worth. His resourcefulness and agility saved Asgard, but only after he himself had brought the gods to the brink of disaster. However, the chaos sown by Loki could not last forever. His deceptions, even the most successful, eventually led to the Aesir losing trust in him. Loki, accustomed to being the central figure, crossed the line when he caused the death of Balder. Although the original mentions the abduction of Sif, Thor's wife, as a possible turning point, the death of Balder is a more significant event. After that, Loki continued to play his role, as if unaware that his days in Asgard were numbered. He is a complex figure, hero and traitor, savior and destroyer. He symbolizes the very essence of myths. Loki reminded everyone that the world is never black and white, that every situation has many facets, and that change is the only constant in life. Now let's talk about how the two great groups of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, first clashed in a battle for control over the universe, and then found a way to coexist. They existed simultaneously, but were completely different. The Aesir, inhabitants of Asgard, embodied strength, martial prowess, and order. They towered over the other worlds because of their desire for power. The Vanir, on the other hand, were closer to the earth. Their home was Vanaheim, and they ruled over the forces of fertility, magic, and nature. It would seem that each of these clans could rule their own domains, but ambition and pride did not allow them to get along. It all started with a goddess named Gullveig, who came to Asgard from Vanaheim. She was not at all ordinary. Her body seemed to sparkle with gold, and her voice was mesmerizing. Gullveig brought magical knowledge with her and spoke of the riches that the Aesir could obtain if they wanted to cooperate with the Vanir. But her greed for gold and her open desire to influence the Aesir only caused irritation. The Aesir, especially Odin, considered Gullveig a threat. They tried to get rid of her. Gullveig was captured and burned 3 times on the pyre, but she rose from the ashes again and again. She returned to life 3 times, causing terror among the Aesir. For Vanaheim, this was an insult tantamount to a declaration of war. When rumors of the attempted murder of Gullveig reached Vanaheim, the first clashes began. The Vanir believed that the Aesir had shown their arrogance and disrespect, and decided that now they needed to prove their strength. The war between the Aesir and the Vanir was unlike human battles. When the Aesir rushed into battle with swords and spears, the Vanir used magic, and the earth opened up beneath the feet of their enemies. They could cause the Aesir's weapons to break in their hands, and their orderly ranks to scatter. The Aesir, on the other hand, responded with their unwavering strength and military discipline. One of the most famous episodes of the war was the Siege of Asgard. The Vanir destroyed its defensive walls, which the Aesir had built with great difficulty. However, Odin, Thor, and other Aesir rebuilt them again and again, driving away the enemies. It was a confrontation in which no one could prevail. The lands of Asgard and Vanaheim were devastated, but the gods fought as if each battle could be the last. Years of war exhausted both sides. The Aesir and the Vanir realized that their forces were equal, and that continuing the battle would only lead to mutual destruction. They stopped their armies at the borders of the worlds, preparing for a decisive battle. But instead of starting the fight, they met for negotiations. At these negotiations, the parties decided to seek a compromise. Instead of weapons, words were used. The Aesir and the Vanir agreed to a truce that was to cement peace between their clans. To seal the alliance, the Aesir and the Vanir performed a ritual. They collected their saliva in a bowl, which symbolized their union. From this liquid was created the sage Kvasir, an embodiment of knowledge and harmony between the two peoples. Kvasir became a symbol of their new alliance. One of the key conditions of the peace was the exchange of hostages. Each side sent their best representatives to the other camp. The Vanir sent Njord, Freya, and Freyr. Njord, the god of seas, winds, and wealth, became one of the revered gods of Asgard. His children, Freya and Freyr, brought to Asgard the magic of fertility, prosperity, and love. Freya also taught the Aesir the art of satyr, magic that allowed them to predict the future and control fate. The Aesir, in turn, sent Honir and the wise Mimir to Vanaheim. However, Honir was indecisive and could not make decisions without Mimir's advice. Angered by this, the Vanir beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Asgard. Odin, in order not to lose Mimir's knowledge, revived the head with magic. Since then, Mimir's head has become his advisor. The truce changed both clans of gods. By combining their efforts, the Aesir and the Vanir created a more harmonious universe. The Vanir brought magical knowledge and connection to nature to Asgard, and the Aesir helped the Vanir master the art of war and strengthen their world. But the peace between the Aesir and the Vanir was not absolute. The shadow of rivalry never completely disappeared, and sometimes it made itself known in minor conflicts. Nevertheless, the alliance between the two clans became one of the foundations of the universe. After a fragile peace was established between the Aesir and the Vanir, it seemed that balance had finally been restored. But even among the gods, where everyone possesses power, magic, and immortality, fate always finds its way. And one of the most tragic episodes in the history of Asgard is the death of Baldur, the bright and beloved god. If in the war between the Aesir and the Vanir there was a chance for negotiations, then the death of Baldur became a harbinger of destruction. It was not just a blow to the family of gods, but the beginning of a chain of events that led straight to Ragnarök. Let's understand how Loki's machinations caused this tragedy and why Baldur's death changed everything. Baldur, the son of Odin and Frigg, was one of the most beloved gods of Asgard. He was called the Bright One because he literally shone, filling everyone around him with warmth and joy. He was a symbol of life, harmony, and peace, an ideal that even the gods strive to emulate. His radiance resembled the sun, and his presence gave a sense of tranquility. But one day, everything changed. Baldur began to have dreams about his own death. These dreams were not just nightmares. They were visions that fate itself was sending him. When he told his mother Frigg about them, she was horrified. She knew that if Baldur died, the balance in the world would be broken. Frigg, desperate to save her son, decided to do the impossible. She went around the world, demanding that all creatures, plants, and objects swear that they would never harm Baldur. Stones, trees, beasts, diseases, and weapons all gave their oath. It seemed that Baldur was now invulnerable. The gods even began to make a game of it. They threw stones, swords, and arrows at Baldur to make sure that he really couldn't be harmed. Everything bounced off him, but there was one plant that Frigg had forgotten, a small, inconspicuous bush of mistletoe, which she considered too insignificant to take an oath from. Loki could not stay away. He was angered by the universal love that surrounded Baldur, and he saw this as a chance to sow chaos. Learning from Frigg that mistletoe remained without an oath, Loki immediately conceived a plan. Taking the form of an old woman, he came to Frigg and spoke with her, finding out that it was mistletoe that could kill the bright god. At another feast, where the Aesir again threw various objects at Baldur, Loki approached the blind god Höd. He stood aside, not participating in the fun, as he could not see. Loki handed him an arrow made of mistletoe and said, "Why don't you participate? I'll guide your hand." Höd, suspecting nothing, threw the arrow, obeying Loki. When the mistletoe arrow struck Baldur, all of Asgard froze. The god who had always shone fell to the ground dead. His light went out. The gods were shocked. No one could believe that this was possible. Anger and sorrow filled the hearts of the Aesir, and Frigg wept, unable to reconcile herself to the loss. Baldur's death showed that even they, the gods, were not immortal. Baldur's death is not just a tragedy. It was the beginning of the end. Baldur symbolized light, hope, and order. His death meant that darkness had begun to prevail. It was the first step towards Ragnarök, the final battle where the world would plunge into chaos. After Baldur's death, the Aesir tried to bring him back from Helheim. They sent one of the gods, Hermod, to the realm of the dead. But Hel, the ruler of this world, agreed to return Baldur only on the condition that all creatures in the world would weep for him. And everyone wept, beasts, people, trees, and stones, all except one creature, a giantess named Thok, who refused to shed a tear. Legend has it that it was Loki himself, having taken another form. After Baldur's death, the Aesir were consumed with anger. They turned it on Loki, accusing him of betrayal. This was the beginning of his downfall, which ended with his capture and punishment. However, along with this, the relentless countdown to Ragnarök began. Baldur's death was a reminder that even the brightest forces cannot defend themselves from darkness if they allow it to penetrate the world. It is a tragedy that is remembered not only as a harbinger of the end, but also as a symbol of the fragility of the world of the gods. But until the end of time came, the Aesir continued to fight against the threats that could harm their order. Some of these threats were related to monsters born of chaos and Loki himself. One of these creatures was Fenrir, a huge wolf whose power and strength frightened even the gods. And among all these battles, the heroic deeds of gods such as Tyr, the god of war, stand out. Fenrir, the huge wolf and son of Loki, grew by leaps and bounds. When he was first brought to Asgard, he was just a pup, but his power and malice already caused the gods concern. Growing up in Asgard, Fenrir became increasingly dangerous, and the Aesir realized that one day he could destroy everything they had built. Odin received a prophecy that Fenrir would play a key role in Ragnarök, killing Odin himself. This forced the Aesir to look for a way to stop him before he became too strong. However, none of them dared to approach the wolf to harm him, except for one god, Tyr. Tyr was the god of war. Known for his honesty and bravery, he's one of the few who could connect with Fenrir, even as the wolf grew increasingly ferocious. When the Aesir decided to bind Fenrir, they created the strongest chains, Ledding and Dromi, and offered the wolf a chance to test his strength by breaking them. Fenrir, confident in his power, allowed himself to be chained and easily shattered them. Then, the Aesir turned to the dwarves, who crafted the magical Gleipnir, made from 6 impossible components: the sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of mountains, the sinews, in the sense of feelings, of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. This fetter looked like a soft silken ribbon, but it was unbreakable. When the Aesir again offered Fenrir to test his strength, the wolf became suspicious. He declared that he would only agree if one of the gods placed their hand in his mouth as a sign of trust. Tyr, realizing that no one else would do it, stepped forward. He placed his right hand in Fenrir's jaws while the Aesir bound the wolf. As soon as the Gleipnir was tightened and Fenrir realized he couldn't break free, he furiously snapped his jaws shut, severing Tyr's hand. The loss of his hand didn't stop Tyr. This act made him a symbol of sacrifice for the common good. Fenrir was bound and sent to faraway lands, where he would remain until Ragnarök itself. After Baldur's death, the world began to change. The 9 worlds, once bound by order and harmony, became consumed by chaos. People ceased to honor the gods, and hostility and greed filled human hearts. Fratricide became one of the main symbols of this downfall. According to prophecies, brothers would begin to kill each other, fathers would fight with sons, and the world of men would plunge into endless wars. Ragnarök would begin not in Asgard, but among mortals, whose actions would resonate throughout the cosmos. Loki, the main culprit behind Baldur's tragedy, was captured and punished, but his malice only intensified. Chained in a cave, he plotted revenge, knowing that his children, Fenrir, Jörmungandr, and Hel, would play their role in the coming end. Each of these events carried profound symbolism. Baldur's death, fratricide, and the moral decay of humanity showed that the world had reached its breaking point. It was a sign that the order the gods had tried to maintain for centuries could no longer contain chaos. As the sun dims and people lose faith in the gods, darkness descends. The gods understood that Asgard's days were numbered, but they still tried to prevent the universe from complete destruction. Every omen, from Baldur's death to the decline of morals, brought them closer to one thing: the inevitable end of times, Ragnarök. But it was not just the end, but also the beginning of a new world. The gods knew that their fate was predetermined, but even in the face of doom, they prepared to fight one last battle. Asgard was gripped by anxious anticipation. The gods, usually proud and unyielding, now felt the breath of the inevitable end. Their hearts tightened with foreboding. The earth cracked, icy winds carried threats, and ocean waves began to rise higher and higher. Too many omens converged. Ragnarök was no longer a prophecy. It was becoming a reality. Loki, chained to a rock in the depths of the cave, endured torment that the Aesir considered eternal. The venom dripping onto his face caused such pain that his screams shook the earth. But when the earth trembled more strongly than usual, the chains began to tear against the rocks. His shackles loosened. He broke free, greedily inhaling the air, filled with the premonition of chaos. Now Loki no longer hid. His place was at the forefront of the coming destruction. Freed, he headed to Jotunheim, where the ice giants, thirsting for revenge against the gods, were already waiting for him. With him was Hrym, captain of the ship Naglfar, made from the fingernails of the dead. Loki and the Jötnar forged an alliance that would destroy everything the Aesir had built, and in the south, in fiery Muspelheim, the giant Surtur already unsheathed his blazing sword, preparing to lead his fire demons to destroy Bifrost. Meanwhile, from the depths of the ocean, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, began to rise. His appearance was a disaster for all living things. The seas billowed from his presence, and his venomous breath poisoned the air. And in Helheim, Hel opened the gates, releasing her subjects. The dead, whose eyes burned with emptiness, silently came forth to join Loki's army. Asgard, standing at the top of the worlds, watched this with concern. The gods saw the forces of chaos gathering from all sides. Odin, always confident in his wisdom, sent his ravens Hugin and Munin to learn the latest news from the worlds. The ravens returned with grim news. Armies of giants, the dead, and demons were already moving towards Asgard. But the Aesir did not flinch. Odin stood on his throne and surveyed his brethren. He knew that this would be their last battle. Each of them had their role, and no one was going to retreat. Thor, holding Mjolnir, was ready to face Jörmungandr. His determination was unbreakable, like the lightning that flashed in his eyes. Tyr, who lost his hand in the fight with Fenrir, sharpened his sword, understanding that his life would now be given for the sake of victory. Freya gathered the magic of the veneer, preparing to use it to give Asgard even a small chance. On the Bifrost Bridge, connecting Asgard to the rest of the worlds, stood Heimdall. In his hand, he held the horn Gjallarhorn, the sound of which was to announce the beginning of the battle. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the first lights of Surtur's army were already visible. When the stomp of demons and giants began to thunder across the Rainbow Bridge, Heimdall raised the horn. The piercing sound of the Gjallarhorn echoed throughout all the worlds, proclaiming that Ragnarök had begun. Asgard shook. The gods raised their weapons. Their battle cry echoed through the halls. This was their last battle. They knew that they could not stop the end, but each of them was ready to give their life so that a new world could be born from the ashes of the old. And when the enemies approached the gates of Asgard, the Aesir stepped forward to meet the chaos. First onto the battlefield stepped Odin, the supreme god, with his spear Gungnir in hand. He towered over the hill, his gaze fixed on Fenrir, the giant wolf that had broken free of his bonds and was now free. The wolf, puffing out his chest and opening his jaws, let out a howl that seemed to shake the earth. Odin did not flinch. He knew that this battle would be his last, but he was ready to meet his fate. The wolf lunged forward like an avalanche. His size was terrifying. Odin raised his spear and threw it with lightning speed. The spear, shining with magic, struck Fenrir's hide, but did not stop him. Fenrir rose on his hind legs and jumped. The beast's jaws snapped shut, and Odin disappeared into his mouth. It was a moment that made time stand still. The supreme god of Asgard, a symbol of wisdom and power, had fallen, swallowed by chaos. But his death was not in vain. It was a sign for the other gods. It was time to fight to the last. At the other end of the battlefield, Thor, god of thunder, came face to face with his archenemy, the world serpent, Jörmungandr. The serpent rose above the ground, his body writhing in the sky, his mouth spewing poisonous vapor that poisoned everything around. The waves of the ocean carried his poison throughout the world, destroying trees, homes, and life. Lightning struck around Thor's figure, as if nature itself obeyed his will. With a thunderous roar, he hurled Mjolnir, which struck the serpent's head with terrifying force. Jörmungandr hissed, his body contorted, and water shot into the air in huge fountains. The serpent raised his head and struck with his tail, shaking the earth. Thor barely managed to stay on his feet, but his fury was limitless. He rushed forward with a strength that could only be born from the awareness of the imminent end. Mjolnir fell on the serpent again and again, until he finally collapsed dead, exhaling the last drops of poison. But this was not a clean victory. Thor took only 9 steps before he felt the poison penetrate his body. He fell to his knees, his breath became heavy, and the hammer fell from his hand. The god of thunder perished, but his sacrifice saved the world from the serpent's poisonous chaos. Loki, the leader of the army of chaos, finally met Heimdall, the defender of Asgard. Their eyes met on the battlefield, full of fire, blood, and shadows. Loki smiled. His eyes burned with a thirst for revenge. Heimdall, with the Gjallarhorn in one hand and a sword in the other, stood like an unwavering wall. Without further ado, they rushed at each other. Loki, quick and cunning, dodged Heimdall's blows. His dagger flashed in the air, leaving deep wounds on the Guardian's armor. Heimdall, on the other hand, was strong and steadfast. His strikes were precise, and his strength was unwavering. The fight was desperate. Loki used all his tricks, turning into shadows. deflecting blows. But Heimdall fought as the embodiment of order. Finally, they both inflicted mortal wounds on each other. Their bodies collapsed simultaneously, and their blood mixed with the mud under their feet. Both fell, and their battle remained a draw. In the midst of this chaos, as gods and monsters perished one after another, the branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree, trembled. Its roots, soaked in the poison of Jörmungandr, began to wither. Surtur, the fire giant, raised his flaming sword and pointed it at the tree. A huge flame engulfed its branches, spreading throughout all the worlds. Along with the flame, the Bifrost Bridge burned. It cracked and collapsed, consumed by fire. Stars fell from the sky, and the earth cracked, plunging all living things into the abyss. This was the end. Ragnarök had ended. The gods had fallen, the worlds destroyed. But from the ashes of the old world, a new one began to grow. It was the end of an era, but not the end of everything. And although the Aesir were gone, their legacy remained. A reminder that even in chaos there is room for rebirth. The flame subsided. The earth, torn by war, still smoldered, but the rumble of battle no longer sounded in the heavens. The waves, raised in the fury of Jörmungandr, gradually subsided, and the poisoned air slowly cleared. The winds no longer carried the smell of burning, and the shadows of the burned-out worlds began to dissipate. Not all the gods fell in battle. Among the fire and chaos were those whom fate allowed to see the new dawn. Two of Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, survived Ragnarök. They were still young, but their strength was great. They found Mjolnir, the hammer that their father held in his hands in the last moments of his life. This hammer now belonged to them as the legacy of Thor, a symbol of protection and thunder in the reborn world. Vidar and Vali also survived from the gods. Vidar, Odin's son, was known for his silent strength. It was he who avenged his father's death by tearing Fenrir's jaws apart. He remained standing among the ruins, unbroken, ready to revive the world. Vali, another son of Odin, also survived. He was the one who was born to avenge Baldur. But now another fate awaited him, to create a new world. But perhaps the most amazing thing was the return of Baldur himself. His spirit did not disappear. He did not remain forever in the cold halls of Helheim. When the battle ended, when all 9 worlds shuddered in their final breath, Baldur returned from the realm of the dead. Along with him returned Hod, his involuntary killer, now forgiven. Now Baldur, once fallen from Loki's machinations, was to become the new ruler of the reborn world. But what about the people? Weren't they also part of this story? Hidden deep in the roots of Yggdrasil, or in the grove of Hodmimisolt, 2 people named Leif and Lifthrasir survived. They were not touched by Surtur's fire or Jörmungandr's poison. Their destiny is to give rise to a new humanity that will repopulate the world. The ashes settled. The sun, once hidden behind clouds of smoke and poison, rose again over the sky. It was a new sun, the daughter of the old luminary, which died during the battle. Now her light touched the earth, reviving it. Where waves and flames had raged before, grass sprouted again. The forest that burned in Surtur's fire began to grow back. The streams, poisoned by the serpent, became clean. Even the air itself, which was heavy with ash, became light and fresh. In the place of Asgard, there was now only a wasteland. The halls of Odin, Thor, Frigg, and all the other gods had turned into ruins. But a new Asgard, the field of Idavol, was already appearing on the horizon. It was more modest, quieter, but it was not constrained by old grievances and prophecies. Here, the world was born again. Baldur, returned from the realm of the dead, was now ready to become the ruler of this new world. He looked at his brothers and the surviving gods and knew that together they would build something new, something better than what had been before. In this new world, there was no place for Loki's chaos, for Odin's unrestrained thirst for power, for Thor's destructive storms. It was a world where order and nature existed in harmony. But at its very core, there was still a trace of the past, the memory of Ragnarök, of the fact that even the gods are not eternal. The new world was better, but it knew that it might face trials again someday. But while the new luminary shone and leaves grew on the branches, life had a chance. That was what mattered most. Stories about gods, heroes, and prophecies did not disappear with the advent of the new era. Even after the fall of Asgard, their images continue to live on. The myths that the ancient skalds told by the fire passed into books, films, games, becoming an integral part of modern culture. Today, Thor, Odin, or Loki are known even to those who have never opened the old sagas. They have moved to comics, become characters in blockbusters and TV shows. Of course, their images often change, adapting to the new era, but the essence remains the same. Thor remains a symbol of strength and protection. Loki, of cunning and unpredictability. Odin, of wisdom and strategy. Their stories are woven into modern narratives, proving that they are eternal. In video games, such as the God of War series, mythology comes alive, allowing players to face gods and monsters themselves. In literature, from Neil Gaiman's novels to Rick Riordan's books, mentioning Percy Jackson isn't entirely accurate. He is from Greek mythology, but Riordan has also written about Scandinavian. Ancient gods get a new life. And in cinema, their stories are retold again and again, sometimes distorted, but still recognizable. For the ancient Scandinavians, myths were not just stories. They shaped their attitude to life. The Vikings were not afraid of death because they knew if they fell with a sword in their hands, they would go to Valhalla. They believed that even if Ragnarök came, one must fight to the end. This spirit, this philosophy, continues to live. It manifests itself in codes of honor, in military strategy, in art, in how people perceive the inevitability of change today. Myths are not just stories about the past, they shape the present. And perhaps that is why Scandinavian mythology continues to inspire millions of people around the world. But not only the gods left their mark on history. Among the people too, there were those whose names became part of the great epic. And one of the most famous heroes, standing on the border between myth and reality, was Ragnar Lodbrok. Let's get to know his story for one last time. He was a man, but his name sounded as if he himself had come out of myth. His exploits were so great that even after centuries, it is impossible to say for sure where history ends and legend begins. He was a Viking, a pirate, a conqueror, a ruler, a husband of powerful wives, and a father of celebrated sons. His life is a bridge between the world of legends and the world of reality. And his death became so symbolic that it is hard to believe that it could simply be an accident. Skalds sang that he was a descendant of Odin. Perhaps this was just a beautiful metaphor, but his fate itself resembles the path of a mythological hero. He was the Viking king who lived in an era when the world was changing. He knew no peace. His sword was always looking for a new battle, and his ships were looking for new lands. Lodbrok is not a surname, but a nickname meaning leather pants. Legends say that he wore special leather pants, treated with resin, to protect himself from snake bites during one of his exploits. But perhaps this was just an attempt to explain a name that passed from century to century. He became famous for his daring raids. France, England, Ireland. No one could feel safe if his Drakars appeared on the horizon. His most famous campaigns are connected with Paris and England. Ragnar was not only a warrior, but also a strategist, a man who always knew how to find a way out. Even the Franks had heard of the Vikings, but they did not think that anyone would dare to attack the Great Paris. However, in 845, Ragnar's fleet approached the walls of the city. He divided his forces, creating chaos among the defenders, and then, besieging the city, demanded a huge ransom. The frightened King Charles the Bald paid a huge sum of silver and gold, which could have been the price of an entire kingdom. But Paris was just one episode. The most famous part of his story is connected with England, where his fate was predetermined. Legends say that Ragnar sailed to the shores of Northumbria with a small army, was shipwrecked, and captured. He ended up in the hands of King Ella II. Ella came up with an execution worthy of myth. He ordered Ragnar to be thrown into a pit full of venomous snakes. It is said that when the snakes stung him, the Viking did not flinch. He did not beg for mercy and did not call upon his gods or relatives. Instead, he only uttered the famous words, "How the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers." This was not just a threat, it was a prophecy, and it came true. When Ragnar's sons learned of his death, they did not just go to take revenge. They unleashed such wrath on England that even centuries later it was remembered. They gathered the great heathen army, defeated Northumbria, and subjected King Ella to a terrible execution known as the Blood Eagle. And with that, our lecture comes to an end. We've journeyed through the ages, from the mythical beginnings of the world and the great gods of Asgard to legendary Vikings like Ragnar Lodbrok. We saw how the world was born and how it fell during Ragnarök, how myths shaped people's worldview, and how they continue to live in our culture today. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope this lecture was interesting and informative for you, and perhaps even inspired you to look at ancient legends in a new way. Until next time, and may the gods always be kind to you.